See, may I just follow up, because the connection, an important connection to me, I think, is on the problem of price volatility. Because as I understand your 5 or 6 year investment program, you're taking a lot of the risk on yourself, because people will say, well, prices of phosphates are going to fluctuate, prices of DAP is going to fluctuate, so maybe we'll invest, but maybe we won't invest. But you're going ahead with a very big program despite this. So it would seem to me, from the risk mitigation point of view, there's a case to be made here. I mean, if it doesn't turn out to be profitable, you're going to be sitting there with excess capacity, and then they'll say, well, maybe your decision wasn't such a smart one. But from the point of view of public goods and collective action in the world that my pointy-headed colleague here was introducing into the, you're actually doing a public service, it seems to me. Am I right there? Am I off base?
You're not, but Louise, do you want to address particularly this question? Or?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Maybe make a few comments. I think phosphate is a very interesting case in point when it comes to how we will deal with scarce resources in the future. The fact that we have higher prices will indeed lead not only to investments, but also to new technology in terms of better retrieval of phosphate. Now, this may not be the short-term interest of OCP, but in terms of the world, and therefore also in terms of global public resources, and hence also for OCP, I think in the longer term, the fact that we will do better work with the same amount of phosphate by being able to retrieve some of that from our waste, I think is going to be an enormous benefit for all of us. And there's a very similar case to be made, for example, with the use of fossil fuels. I think the whole technology will go into more efficiency, more output per unit of input. Now, having said that, the continent that most lacks phosphate is, of course, Africa. And Morocco is very well placed to talk with the African leaders to make sure that we have a long-term plan to get the phosphate input in African agriculture up to standard. I remember that when I was still a student, we once jokingly calculated if you would just sort of throw rock phosphate out of a plane over Africa, you would already do a lot to raise African production, even at the very low levels of retrieval that you have with rock phosphate. I think there is a major challenge, and Mr. Tarab knows this because we have discussed this, to make sure that we get responsible phosphate input into African agriculture. That means availability, but it also means an economic plan. And again, it means that high food prices are an incentive for better phosphate use also in African agriculture. And interestingly, to come back to your point about, is Morocco going to be the new Brazil? Well, you probably know that geologically, the northeast of Brazil and Morocco have something in common, because they were once, many millions, hundreds of millions years ago, they were of course joined. And so there are some lessons to be drawn from the development of Brazil and the development of Morocco, if only for the fact that you both have soils that actually need a lot of care. And I'm very much in agreement there that we need to make sure that soil is also, in the short term, a non-replenishable resource. And so caring for our soil means also making sure that we feed the soil in such a way that we have the best possible output. Now, what it really also needs for Morocco, as it has done in Brazil, is making sure we have enough young people that go, not only that remain farmers, but also go into agricultural science. If there's one tragedy today that we don't speak about, is that fewer and fewer bright young people go into agricultural science. 30 years ago, that was still a career in many countries that people wanted. Now parents want their kids to go into MBOs or to become medical doctors, what have you. And we're not recruiting the best scientists. And I think it would be fantastic if, with the help of OCP, Morocco could actually launch the program. And I know you're already working on the university to get young people into the innovations that are needed, not only to feed Morocco, but have the same kind of effect that that Brazil now has, or China or India, on the rest of the world in terms of technology and innovation. And I think that sort of nascent Moroccan model could really be something that for the African continent could be of great use.
I don't want to rain on the high price parade here, because I think the producer incentives are obviously clearly there, and if you can get prices a little bit higher, volatility a little bit lower, we'll see commensurate investment, right? But it probably needs to be mentioned that in 2007, 2008, there was rioting in 48 different countries, right? We saw the Prime Minister of Haiti lost office in the aftermath of food riots. You could make the argument that the toppling of the government in Madagascar was related to that as well. And then food prices were implicated in the political instability in the Middle East and North Africa, right? The Arab Spring, at least according to some, is in part a response to, right, higher food prices. So I think I guess the question is sort of how do you adjudicate sort of the producer incentives with the fact that you have urban populations that have grown relatively accustomed to low-price, plentiful food, and the cost of adjustments are being borne at the household level, and this is pushing people out into the streets?
Thank you. But I just didn't want to miss something. This is a global governance conference, and Madame Fresco just reminded us that geologically Brazil and Morocco were tied. So I guess the pressile oil and gas reserves, we can have a claim, some supposedly.
It is more connected to Angola or Namibia.
I think we're reaching a point on which I would like to farm policies, an agricultural policy can be paid by two persons, either the consumer or the taxpayer. If you remember, 1933, the New Deal, prices had to be kept low, so direct subsidies paid by the taxpayer. 1958, Europe, it was a 30 glorious years of growth. Food prices were put high in order to give incentive to the farmers to produce, and that was paid for by the consumer. I haven't found the solution, but so many people intelligent here that you will probably find. What do you do in a developing country where the consumer is can make revolution and needs to have low prices, and when there are no taxpayer? How do you finance an agricultural policy? If we all agree that the farmer needs stable and remunerative price, without being too European, the perfect model for a developing country is common agricultural policy as designed in 1958. That was probably a perfect policy if you want to raise production. The problem, at that time it was financed by the consumers. We can't put that in developing countries. And the other reference, US 1933, it's costly, it's complicated. So if you have any solution.
If I may, yeah. I think there are all kinds of techniques. I remember how they did it in Israel in the 1960s and 70s. We have the same problem with the small farmer or the small agriculture or the one who grow up chicken or making milk, etc. In order to solve these problems and to ensure certain price for the agriculture, otherwise he will not work and he will not risk his own money, the government established in Israel a different kind of councils. Council for chicken, councils for different agricultural products. And in a way, the farmer cannot sell his own product just to the market. He have to supply it to certain company, big company, which was by all the farmers in Israel, and they were selling it to the last consumer. In that case, the government, as a matter of fact, can control for a long time the prices and even guarantee the price for certain products. For example, even until today, because we have the problem of small farmers who grow up chickens and eggs, etc., and during the times the land in the center of Israel became very expensive, it's not worthwhile anymore to make out of it agricultural, then they have to transfer the amount of eggs that everybody have to farm to different other farmers in the Galilee, which is in the rural areas, and therefore the government, as a matter of fact, buy from them this product amount of eggs and chickens and give it to the farmers which are rural part away of in Israel, and now they're producing it and having the certain guarantee for a certain price for egg, a certain price for chicken. That helped the small farmer to be sure that he have kind of economical possibility of living. So I don't know if it is possible to be done in a large place like France, but in developed countries, in my opinion, it could be done in many places, that the government can be involved and create some kind of system which really provides certain kind of guarantee to the farmer that he's not lost. And even another thing is that sometimes there is a disaster, by the nature. Let's say snow or cold, which kill all the profits, everything of the farmer. So the government developed a kind of insurance for all the agriculturals. And every time that there is some kind of disaster, the farmers are insured. And even the government sometimes even are not insured. When there is disaster, the government pay compensation to the agricultural. I remember one of the ministers of finance in the past, Levi Eshkol, which was afterwards prime minister, he said, I don't understand how come that I pay in the same year compensation for a big rain and for drought. How it goes together on the same year. So there is systems in order to ensure that the small farmer will stay alive.
Thank you. But let me just, your question was...
Yeah, but if I may, on the 28th of November, the Canadian Parliament has voted the abolition of the monopoly of the Canadian Wheat Board. That means that still the wind of liberalization is blowing.
Just to, you went back to history, and but I think there was a third component. You asked whether they should be paid by the consumer, the taxpayer, or the taxpayer. But let's keep in mind that in the Western world, actually it was paid by none, but by debt. That is also a solution. Why?